Hey, family, it's your sister Jocelyn here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Faith on the Journey. And if this is your first time tuning in, we are a Christian company that's committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and find a sense of community, which is so important when you're going through those difficult, painful moments of your life. And for the last month, we have been really diving into the topic of how to write a new narrative. And when we're talking about a narrative, we're really describing how we all have a filter, if you will, a filter in which we view ourselves, others, and the world around us. That's how we see things. And it's important for us to take moments to evaluate that filter, evaluate that narrative, if you will, because sometimes that filter can be off kilter due to experiences, due to toxic teaching or painful life events that have caused us to have a filter that's not in line with God's word. And so we assess and then we try to make sure that we correct that narrative so that we can fully walk into what God is calling us to do. And we've dived into so much for the last couple weeks, but I really wanted to bring this topic home by bringing on a woman of God who does this work. And she does this work because she's experienced this for herself. And so I'm excited to welcome Victoria Walker to the show. She is an author, she's a podcaster, she's an entrepreneur, and she is the executive or director and educator at Choose to Think Academy. She also has done 30 years worth of work in teaching Spanish to people, which I need her help with that because I'm still trying to learn that foreign language. But Victoria's mission is to coach women on how to live their best thought life and how to start successful businesses. And while doing that, she has been leading Bible studies, she leads small women's groups, she's written 2 books, she writes blogs. Okay, so you could tell she's busy doing this work, right? And she's been featured in Just Between Us magazine, which is world renowned. She also does regular devotionals through Guidepost Strength and Grace magazine. So she has a lot to share, and I'm so grateful to bring her on the show. So help me welcome her. All right, Victoria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, and thank you for your kind introduction.
Absolutely, it's all true.
Yeah.
All true.
Oh my goodness, it's so good to be here. I was just grinning from ear to ear as you were talking. You do
Yes,
such a
yes.
good job.
Thank you. Well, I vibe so well with what you do. It's right up my alley, right? In terms of
Yes.
the work that God is using you to do in the lives of so many people. But before we get into that, I would love to learn a little bit more about your story and particularly what was your life like right before you decided to go down this new venture? Can you please share with us what was going on in your life at the time and what was your relationship like with God?
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. So back in 2016, I have 4 children and they were getting married, graduating from college, going on with their lives. I had a job that I loved at a local university teaching there full time, and it was such a blessing. I'm a homeschool mom of 19 years, and the decision even to go to full time teaching was a huge one. So I was there at that job, and they had such severe cutbacks, especially for some of the programs that weren't required. It was mainly an equine college. So I lost that job that I loved. I loved the colleagues. I mean, I was on cloud nine. And then my kids were going on with their lives, which is all good. And then menopause and the hormonal upheaval that that caused. And I had you asked about relationship with God. I had a God-sized dream in my life that did not come true. And I was a Christian, I guess, at that point for about 14 years, and or maybe 12 to 14 years, because I had an adult conversion. And it blew me away that God didn't do what I asked him to do. As it's childish. Now I can realize that. but at the time it was a godly dream. It was his will. It was lined up perfectly to really happen. It just didn't. And so I was sad, angry, frustrated, in crisis mode. The culmination of all of these things kind of boom, they crossed, and it took me under into a deep depression. At that time, at a certain point, I sought medical attention because I'm like, I need help with this. And my gynecologist suggested antidepressants or hormonal replacement therapy. A mentor of mine, just maybe a week or so later, actually challenged me. She said, Victoria, and I've known her for years. She's still my mentor. I just think the world of her. And she challenged me. She said, Victoria, why don't you learn what it means to take thoughts captive? And I knew the verse. That wasn't anything surprising, but she must have recognized something in me that was a little bit off. And so I took her up on that challenge, and my life has absolutely never been the same since then. I'd long been a writer and a blogger, but suddenly I also found myself in life. I'm like, okay, I've been single for about 20 years, and I thought, what's next for me? God, what do you have in mind for me now? So even asking that question after this depression has opened up so many doors for me. And now I can say with utmost honesty, transparency, that I've probably never had more joy in my life. And a big part of that is connected to purpose, I know. But I also, without a shadow of a doubt, realized that it started after the depression. That beauty from ashes that arose was really learning how to take my thoughts captive. So that's kind of the nutshell of how I got where I am. And now I'm just like on fire for the things of the Lord. And I'm having a really, really good time. And this is when you can look back and you can say, wow, that depression, which was fairly, I mean, it took the life out of me, the breath out of me, really, and not kind of knocked. It was just a gut punch that I couldn't recover from. But once I started figuring out, what am I thinking about? Because the Bible tells us our words are powerful, but our words are made of thoughts. We have the power of life and death, I think we could infer just through what we're thinking as well. And indeed, that's what it's been in my life, Jocelyn. The power of shifting my thinking to make it line up with God's truth has just changed my life.
Wow. That's amazing. And just thinking about how you went from the state of depression to having this revelation, and then did you all of a sudden say, I need to go out in the world and help everybody else? Or was it a period of time where you really were working on yourself and then got to the place where you started doing the work that you're doing today?
It took me about 2 years to work through the process of taking thoughts captive. And some scientists, neuroscientists might say that if you just take one thought, such as, I'm always alone, I'll always be alone, or something like that, and you begin to de energize that thought, and the Bible, taking it captive essentially is recognizing the thought in the first place. We have to know what we're trying to take, grab a hold of so that we can begin to deconstruct it and de energize it. I like to use the word de energize because when we energize truthful thoughts, that's where we find life and vibrancy. And so we want to de energize those toxic thoughts, whether they are thoughts that the enemy, or little thoughts we may have, that enemy darts that he may fire at us, or comparison with the world or worldly standards, or even sometimes our own flesh. No matter where those thoughts are originating, the idea is to isolate by taking it captive, recognizing it, and then de energizing it and replacing it with God's truth. But it doesn't happen overnight. When I first started, I was able to I just did some what I call brain dumping, where you literally spend time every day just writing about what you're thinking about. And for some people, you may say, that's not my cup of tea. No, thank you on that. But for me, it was a question of real life and death. And once I wrote down everything that I was thinking about, literally just thinking about what I'm thinking about, I had pages of notes. I liken it to popcorn popping in my brain. It was just like, but I was shocked at some of the things I was engaging and giving time to, because when we think something and we continue to focus on it and we continue to our brains are wired with that thought. It's so deeply in a groove there, and we keep ruminating on it and thinking, we're putting more and more energy to it. The grooves go deeper. And so it was a little bit shocking to me just how much work I had to do. And I'm going to say it took about 2 years. Matter of fact, after 2 years, I reached a point where I got frustrated because I got so good at taking thoughts captive. I was on every thought. And I live in Kentucky. And in Kentucky, we have dandelions. And I don't spray my yard, my little teeny little, yard I have here. I don't spray, like, to kill out the weeds. Some people say dandelions aren't a weed, but what I don't know how they're classified, but most people consider them as weeds. And they shoot up the beautiful little yellow flower, but from there they go to this long stem. They get stemmy, and they have a little, like a powder puff on the top, which is their seed spray, and they become a little unsightly at that point. But I likened the thoughts that I was having to my yard, which is filled with dandelions, and every single dandelion to me represented a thought. And I would just keep rushing out there, and I would just snip, 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 snip. I would get all the thoughts. I could do that so quickly. I became very quick at it, but I was lacking. The Lord, came to show me as I continued to inquire and seek mentorship and so forth, that the real issue now was that I needed to dig up those roots. And so what began as a process just to take thoughts captive, the real transformation happened, and the Bible says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So that transformation was kind of really took a lot of ground, or I was able to advance with God's help to a to the where I am now, another 2 years down the road, in a way that I dealt with some root issues, and I dealt with, and many of them are common. Just because I had hundreds of toxic thoughts, many of them are related. I call them thought clusters, where they're very similar. And the root it could be a root of fear. It could be a root of rejection and bitterness. There are several different ones that it could be. But so you could take 5 thoughts and say, they all go with rejection, or, excuse me, maybe self-pity or something like that. So at that point, it was then after I pivoted and came into real healing and wholeness, and it felt so good to me. That's when I'm like, Lord, I have a voice to share this. You've gifted me, Father, with writing. I love that. My passion, my giftings, serving others is all coming together now. So let me share what I've learned with other folks. And that's where I developed the digital courses, and my kids said, Mom, you should podcast. And so I'm like, okay, let me, so things just started tumbling together in such nice ways. And here I am now, trying to pivot away from full-time teaching, teaching Spanish. And by the way, I can help you with Spanish, Jocelyn. Don't worry about it. To a full-time ministry. And I'm
Wonderful.
having the time of my life doing it. So
It
I hope I
sounds like
answered your question.
you
Okay.
did, and I appreciate that, because it was one of those things where you realize I have to do a lot of work with this. This is not going to come easy, and transformation doesn't, because we talked about in previous episodes how we're pushing against what has been ingrained in us for so many years. What comes natural is like our default. But in the process of doing so, it seems like you learned so many lessons, valuable gems that you're able to share with your clients. But one follow-up question that I have that I think it can be helpful is, can you describe the connection between our thoughts and emotions? Like what is the
Mhm.
connection and why did you hone in on those two specific things so much in your work?
Okay. I think, as far as what I've learned, Jocelyn, and scientists might tell you different things on this. Some scientists don't even distinguish between the mind and the brain. I mean, it's a very curious field to study as far as what I've learned. And I will say that I totally nerd out on neuroscience. I am such a geek. It's like, what can I learn? I love the articles, I love the connections. Why? Because it gives me such hope. And because I feel like I could be the poster child for a transformed life based on having a renewed mind, and based on taking thoughts captive, based on Philippians 4:8. What do you think about? God tells us very clearly what to think about. I used to be very emotionally driven. And I would just be going about my business, and all of a sudden I've just had this kind of up and down, up and down, up and down, just really out of the blue. And I don't know if you were like that or if you can relate, but sometimes I could just be moody, and um things would really bother me deeply. And not that they don't bother me now, not that I don't have concerns, but I frame them entirely differently. What I have learned in my own personal study is that our thoughts come first. Let's just pretend, or let's just say our thoughts come first. Those are generated. Now, what makes them come into existence and charge up in our brains and fire off and all that could be externals. It could, like we mentioned, there could be, if I were to fall off my chair right now, well, which came first? I wasn't thinking about falling off my chair. So sometimes it's what happens to us that causes us to think. It's almost like lightning fast, the connection between all of those. But if we say that, in my case, I was able to say, okay, I noticed my emotions after the thoughts. So it was my thoughts that would generate my feelings and emotions. And of course, there are physiological triggers also, because you wonder, oh, I've got butterflies in my stomach because I have to uh, give a speech. Well, there are neurocells aren't just contained here. It's an amazing study where, the brain gut connection, you've heard of that. It's real and it's impactful. And so, I would realize that the thought came first, then the emotion, then the feeling, and then the action or the behavior. So if I'm behaving in a way or acting in a way that is not godly, then I have to back it up a little bit and say, okay, what am I feeling, or what was I feeling, and what were my emotions at that time? And then if I go one step further and I ask myself, well, what was I thinking about? Because sometimes what we think about just is not true. But but if we're thinking about something that is not true, if we're believing a lie, then our emotions will follow suit, and then our behavior follows suit. If I think that I'm in a store and I see a friend that I haven't seen in a while, and it appears that she didn't want to see me or something, or she moved quickly down another aisle, and then I start thinking, gosh, she probably doesn't like me, or she doesn't want to see me, or those assumptions or those thoughts, then suddenly my mood and my emotions follow suit, and I'm like, well, what's up with her? What did I ever say to her? And then maybe the next time I'm having a get together, I don't invite her. I mean, that's kind of extreme, but or maybe I avoid her the next time I see her. Our action is based on those emotions and feelings, which really originate with our thoughts, and they could be totally wrong. We don't know what people are thinking. Maybe she didn't even see me. Maybe she saw me, but she didn't feel like she looked the greatest or something like that. And she just didn't want to, maybe I'm like, oh, and she was just feeling like, no thanks today for Victoria, but not in a
Right.
bad way, not in a malicious way.
Right.
Just because I've done that. I have
Uh-huh.
like, oh my gosh,
This
you
is a
go to
bad day,
Walmart.
I don't wanna be seen,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and it's that day that you see 5 people that you haven't seen in ages, right? So, it
Mhm.
could have been that, and so I really had to just say, "Okay." I have like a 5-step process, and I don't know if you want me to go into that
No,
or
by
not,
all
but
means, please do.
okay, I mean, it's very easy to remember. I call it the 5 R's, and I've alluded a little bit to it, but the first thing that we do is we have to just recognize what we're thinking. And and especially if you find yourself in an icky kind of place, or you're just like, I'm in a little bit of a dip here, or something's not right, then ask yourself, what am I thinking? So you recognize what you're thinking. And then you have to say, I have 3 questions I ask. Is what I'm thinking, is it what God says about me? Is it what God says about himself? And what does God say about my situation? Is this his take on my situation? So if you answer those 3 what questions, what does God say about himself, me, and the situation, then you can tell very quickly if the thought you're having is true or not. And okay, so we do that first. We recognize, and then if it is not true, if it doesn't align with our biblical worldview, our biblical principles, and the truth, then we have to reject it. We have to resist it. And that to me is a part of armoring up each day. We're going to put on the full armor of God. We're going to be ready for those darts that may be coming. And because sometimes it feels like a battle. For me, with all the dandelions in my backyard, it was a battle. And I got frustrated, and I got tired, and I got discouraged in that battle. And because it was more than I needed, just to take another step and in a different direction to come at it, like I said, and go deeper to the roots. But I got tired of resisting and rejecting, almost, because it's like, where's the fruit in this? I'm not bearing the fruit. And I wanted to bear different fruit. And so I was kind of stymied in all that. But I got really good at those 2 steps, at recognizing and rejecting. I even I did a pretty good job at replacing with God's truth. So that would be the third R. We recognize, then we reject or resist, and then we actually have to replace it with God's truth. And I like to call, like, a scripture verse, in this case, I call it a truth lead, because it leads me out of this place where I'm stuck, and it takes me into a different direction altogether. And where there is truth, and where there is truth, there is life, and there's energy and vibrancy and joy, and no lack of any good thing. There's no chaos there. There's peace. It's every good thing we always wanted. And I have this image of a vineyard where I want to work. And by the way, I call my work my worship. I worship in the garden, in the vineyard, and I'm yoked with Christ as I work. It's a total different mindset on doing these things. Now, did the enemy enter the garden? Yes, he did. So we still have to be on guard, but we learn to be yoked with Christ. He bears the heaviness of that. He calls the shots. He gives us the direction, and His Spirit guides us. So I just needed to kind of come under some yokeship in all of this, because I found myself striving and snipping those little dandelions off with no real success, because the next morning I'd wake up and there'd be a gazillion more blooms in action. So after we recognize, reject, resist, and then we replace those thoughts with God's truth. And it could be a verse, it could also be something like a quick, something very quick that resonates with you, like, I'm going to choose joy, or whatever. It doesn't have to necessarily be a Bible verse. I like to use Bible verses, but sometimes I have very quick things that I use, like, for example, I want to keep fit physically, because I think we need to be concerned holistically, our health, and because emotional and mental health is so important, but our physical health is also equally important, and our relationships are equally. So we want to kind of come, or I like to come at life trying to find the areas where I need improvement in each of those little areas of my life. And but from there, after we've get through this process and so forth, then what's really happening is mind renewal. We are experiencing that renewal. And then the final R in the series here would be repeat. That's where people get stuck. That's where they stop. That's where, and it doesn't have to be tedious. It does not have to be difficult. It If you can begin saying, God, your word says you will never leave nor forsake me. Your word says I am never alone. Your word says that you are Emmanuel, God with me. Your spirit is my comforter. If you can find those verses that really speak to you and resonate with you and are an area of need that you have, and you continue to say those over and over again. If you could be in my house, you would see scriptural wall hangings everywhere, because I want truth to surround me, because it's a protection for me and for my mind. And so I want it everywhere, and I want to repeat it. Matter of fact, in 2016, when I was coming through that depression, I decided, and fortunately I was able to do this. I love to travel. And so I wanted to become certified to teach English as a second language, because it was at this time, like, I'm like, okay, what do I do now? Right. I just lost this one job. And so I went back to adjuncting at that time, just teaching at different universities. But that really can wear you out, because you're at all these different institutions just to make up for that loss of income. Right. And I had no benefits again and all of that. And so I was exploring career options, and maybe I need to do ESL or ELL, English language learners, do that kind of training. So I did, and I was able to go to South America and live for the summer in Bogota, in Colombia. And because Cambridge University has programs so that they certify, it's in England, Cambridge is in England, and so they do the certification process, but you can do it everywhere. And it happened to be a little less expensive for me to go to Colombia than it was to go to some of the bigger cities in the US. Plus I got Spanish and I got culture and I got all of that. So I chose to do that. But while I was there, and this was several months after I started learning how to take my thoughts captive, I had already been in this. I did a Caroline Leaf detox your brain, and I think it was 21-day detox. So I had gone through that very early, in this whole process, which taught me a lot. And many of the same things, I'm doing now that I learned that Rapid. She uses different terminology and maybe has a little bit different way of doing it. I used pictures. For me, I used images, and I would sometimes pray and say, Lord, give me an image for this, or what could help me with this truth that I want to know now. So I had basically narrowed down to 23 toxic thoughts, and that were, you know, critical to me. There were 23, and I had 23 images. And every day I would look at that stack, and it grew day after day after day. So I didn't start with 23, I just started with one. And every day I would add to that, because I would have another toxic thought that I would want to address. And studies show, Dr. Leaf says you need to do, like, she's on a 21-day, that's where you start. So that energizing process that occurs in your brain, literally, and she is a neuroscientist. So, she studies this a lot. I'm not educated in all of that, only my own little studies that I do. But so she would say it takes the 21 days, and then you kind of have to multiply that by 3. And then some people even take a year to really have some of the lasting brain change, literally, because our thoughts take up mental real estate. And that's a Caroline Leaf quote. I love that. Our thoughts, we think they're just stuff floating around that, that no, they're made of chemicals, literally. And they take up space in our gray matter in our brain. And so it takes a long time. That repeat step is critically important. If you just recognize and you resist and you replace, and then you're getting some of that renewal, you may need to go to the roots like I did, because there were other thought roots that were there that I needed to address. But if you stop there and you just, oh, I got it now, it's like, okay, I'm never going to be afraid in my life again. Or that doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
It there's a practical application to this. Matter of fact, I call it the art of taking thoughts captive, because to me it's a discipline, it's an art. The more you do it, the better you get. If I start watercolors, and painting, I'm not going to do the greatest at first, but if you give me 30 days and I'm doing it every day, and then I go to 3 months, I think I should show some improvement. And that's exactly what happened with my brain. I so guard my brain. I want to make sure that it's healthy and just like lit up, and all the the connections and the firing is bringing energy not only to my life, because in the end, is it all about me and, oh, I'm happy? Of course not. It's my mission to serve and to help others that is part of my purpose, and where I want to extend that to other people. That's where we get the value. That's where we up the joy level times a billion, as when we're serving others like you're doing, and trying to help others and to get the good news out there, and to show women and men what is 21st century Christian life like. How do we connect the dots between what the Bible says, what we believe, and how we act? COVID happens. Are we to cower away and be afraid? And no, God tells us not to fear. Okay, that sounds good. How do we do that? Well, part of it is reminding ourselves of who He is and what He says about my situation and what He says about me. So the more we get into the God's truth, it really, really does change our life. But it's hard work, and I'm not we never finish. I'm not finished. I want the
None
Lord
of
to
us are.
meddle around with my brain and my heart, because I need growth. I desire growth. And if you could see my rap sheet, you would say, good grief, Victoria, you did that? You said that? How could you do that? I've been a prodigal even in my Christian walk. So it's not like we ever arrive. We continue to work out our salvation. We continue to desire more of God and more of what He wants. And the more we know Him and we're in His Word, we cannot help but change. And He does that. I went to that mentor once and I said, I'm not bearing any fruit. I was so frustrated. I'm like, I'm not bearing any fruit. I wanted the fruit of the Spirit, because patience, where is it? I didn't have it at all. I was mean and rude and just snippy with the checkout clerk. I'm like,
It's the
I don't
checkout
want
clerk,
her to know I'm a Christian, because
right?
I'm not
I get it.
exactly.
But you hit the nail on the head with the patience with the process. That's something that I talk about all the time in this work, that we have to understand that we're, first of all, forever in process. Period. There's not a state of arrival until we go to glory. But in that, like, we also have to be patient with ourselves, because we're constantly
Yes.
learning, uncovering, uprooting, as you described, different things
Mhm.
that need to be worked on. And we're
Yes.
going to constantly have challenges that arrive. So even if you feel like you got this particular thought captive, don't you think 1 second, not another thought's gonna come that you're gonna have to do again. So that, I love the repeat aspect, and I do believe that that's a missing aspect that people have been missing when it comes to this work. But you also told me when we were having a conversation the other day that you focus a lot on gratitude, and I want to take a few
Yes.
moments to speak about that before we wrap up. Can you talk about the gratitude element?
Absolutely. And just one teeny thing about Colombia, though, those 23 thoughts I condensed into little one-line statements. And every single morning, I was there maybe 6 weeks. Every morning I got up and I prayed those very statements, those truth-filled statements, every single morning. And I continued to do that. And I never stopped doing that. Now I don't need to do that anymore because it is I don't have those other ones, they're so de-energized that it doesn't, you know, if I notice it, then I'm quick to shut it down and not partner with the enemy or whatever it may be. So there's all of that. But I wanted to let you know that there was this little lady in Bogota, Colombia, walking around praying, early in the morning and just repeating God's truth over my life. So gratitude. Gratitude to me helped me to come out of that depression because I was so self focused. I was so deep in self pity. And I am not saying that if a listener or someone they love is depressed, that they're giving way to self pity at all. I'm just saying in my situation, I felt really sorry for myself. And I was, why God? Why on earth? Why me? Why now? Why not now? Why is a toxic question if we're not careful. That interrogative word, why, will lead to dark places I don't want to go. And so I don't ask why God or why me or why now. I don't even engage in those thoughts anymore. Instead, I may say, what do you say, God, about me? What do you say, God, about yourself and about my scenario? And God, what can you teach me? Because I want to learn. But gratitude is like a mindset to me. It's like this cloak or this outer covering that we can put on, and it brings such comfort because when we're going through trial and hard times, we can be a little consumed with our own the senses that we have in our own situation. And there is real grief. I should also say that there is certainly real grief. If you've lost a loved one, you need to grieve. There's no amount of gratitude that is going to necessarily help you in that moment. You need to just grieve and be sad and feel that and process all of that. I know I would. So this isn't mind over matter. It's not positive thinking. It's being grateful. And the difference between the like a worldly just be positive and gratitude is that gratitude is likened more to me to praise. We actually have Creator God to whom we can praise. We can be thankful and grateful because we have someone to thank, someone to praise. And that is an amazing privilege that we have for as being Christians. And so when I began to say, okay, I want to be grateful in this scenario. What can I be grateful for? And I began to focus on those things. And it could be simple things like I have a vehicle, I have a washer and dryer, I have hot water, I have a home, I have four healthy children, I have and on and on and on. And we really step aside and we see just how many blessings we have. That alone can melt a stubborn heart and a wayward heart, and it switches our focus and our perspective to a in a way that is you can even feel the difference between, why is this happening to me versus God, I may not understand everything. My thoughts aren't yours. My ways aren't yours, but I do trust you, Lord. And I know you're here. And I know you will teach me through this. And I know that this is for my good. If you there's one's an energy drain and the other fills with life. And so I wanted to be grateful. Thank you, Lord, that you will teach me something. I don't understand my suffering right now, but I do know that there will be a silver lining, that there's something in this that I can use possibly to help others, which is in a way what happened to me from my own suffering and trials. God allows me to be on your podcast today and to speak exactly how his truth impacted me and changed my life and what he did. And it's such good news. And though it came from something that was really horrifying to me and really difficult and troublesome and knocked the wind out of my sails. So gratitude to me helped me consistently pull away from things I didn't know the answers to really, and puts me to, well, I can be grateful that I have internet. Some people in Kentucky don't have internet. Or, does that
So many
answer your
things. I
question?
mean, absolutely. You're hitting the nail on the head, and I just think about even this last year, 2020, breath, breathing. Like think about our lungs until we have a hard time gasping for air with COVID, and just quality time with family, and in the small things that we can do indoors that we were forced to do. There's a number of things that can cause us to say, man, there's a lot that I'm grateful for.
Right.
And we take that for granted. And so I appreciate that perspective. And it sounds like you have a free gift for those who are tuning in, right?
I do. I created what I call the Ultimate Gratitude Guide, and it's about 37 pages. It's a downloadable PDF format. So you can just use the link and then apply to get that easy, no charge. And in that guide, there are some quotes, a little bit about my journey. I have little charts, like a gratitude chart, where you can say, okay, I did this today, or I did this today. And then I have bookmarks that you can print, colorful bookmarks that you can give, little blessing things, giving things. It's just a compilation of things that I used and to help me, to remind me to be grateful. And so I would love it. Anyone can take advantage of that. That would be awesome.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we get that out to our listeners today. I plan
Okay.
on downloading that for myself. So,
Yeah,
so
good.
yeah, so tell our listeners or those who are viewing how they can get in touch with you. You have a podcast, you have your own website. How do we stay connected?
Yeah, the best way probably would be my website, because that's the hub of my entire ministry. And it's called, just by name, victoriadwalker.com. And the podcast, if you're listening on a podcast, same that app, you'll find Choose to Think, and it's with the number 2. And so those are the best ways to stay in touch. I would love that.
Absolutely. Well, if you love our show, then you're going to love hers because obviously she's a woman of God. She's all about helping people to write a new narrative with a
Amen.
core function, which is renewing our mind. And the Bible
Yes.
talks at length about this. So there were so many nuggets that I captured from today's interview. I know I'm going to watch the replay. You're probably going to have to go back and take notes, but I love what you're doing. I love how God is using you. And I wanted to ask this final question to just kind of bring it home for us, and I ask all my guests this question. This show is called Faith on the Journey. And I know it has a special meaning to me, but I'm curious as to when you hear faith on the journey, what does that mean to you?
Faith on the journey. When I think of faith, I think of belief. And one of my favorite Bible verses is in one of the Gospels, where the father whose son is ill comes to him and says to Jesus, can you heal my son? Or if you can, he uses that kind of little tagline on that, like, please heal my son if you can. And Jesus so tenderly looks to him and says, if I can. And so it's, to me, and then the father responds, I believe, help me with my unbelief. And so faith to me is tied so much into our belief, and being honest with God, honest with yourself. If there are areas that you don't have belief, it's okay. Tell God. Certainly, if you're trying to say these Bible verses and to use as truth leads for you to replace the negative thoughts, make sure that you believe what you say, because if you don't, there's no congruence there, there's dissonance there. So if you are afraid, and God says don't be afraid, then you can say, Lord, I'm afraid right now, would you help me with my fear? Would you increase my faith? And so I'm like, it is a journey. So it's growth. We can grow in our faith in this journey. We're to be honest with God about where we are in our faith and our belief, and tell him truthfully and ask him to help us with our faith, and he will indeed do that. And he's done that. He's done that for me.
He always will, and
He
he's
does.
faithful. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again, Victoria. Appreciate you. I encourage you all to stay connected. Look at the show notes to see where you can find her. And if this is your first time tuning in and you enjoyed this broadcast, I also encourage you to subscribe. You can visit our website at faithonthejourney.org, and there you'll find a number of free resources to help you grow your faith on the journey. So, again, we thank you for being here with us today. Hope you enjoyed this broadcast. And until next time, you keep your faith on the journey. See you soon.